Queen Claire stood on the ridge and looked over the camp below. The soldiers moved about, laughing and drinking after a long march. They were strong men, well-trained and proud, yet she felt a deep weight pressing on her chest. The forest stretched around them, dark and silent, and in that silence she felt danger. Her words had warned them during the day, but her warnings had only brought laughter. "Your Majesty, the only predators here are in the old stories," said Captain Luke with a grin. The men near him laughed, and some raised their cups to toast. Claire did not join their laughter. She kept her eyes on the trees. The wind carried no sound of birds, no rustle of small life, nothing but emptiness. Knew that nature never stayed this still without reason. Ethan, a young soldier who often stayed quiet, watched her with uneasy eyes. He had marched with her long enough to notice her senses. When she felt danger, something always followed. Yet he said nothing as the others mocked her fear, sharpened his blade slowly, listening to the jokes. But his eyes often drifted to the queen, could see that she was not laughing. The firelight flickered across the camp. Shadows grew long, reaching between tents and wagons. The soldiers gathered around the flames, telling tales of war and victory. Some lifted their rifles as if mocking monsters in the dark, making growling sounds and laughing at their own bravery. Claire walked among them, her hands folded before her, her face calm yet tense. She felt eyes on her, not the eyes of her men, but something else, something hiding in the trees. The ground under her boots felt wrong. She knelt and pressed her palm to the earth. It was faint, but she felt a tremor, as if something heavy had passed close. She stood quickly and looked around. Ethan noticed her sharp movement and stepped closer. "My queen," Ethan said in a low voice. "What do you sense?" Claire looked at him. He was young, but steady. "Unlike the others who laughed without thought," she whispered. "The ground moves. Something walks near us." Ethan glanced at the trees. The shadows seemed thicker, and the silence pressed down harder. He opened his mouth to warn others, but before he could speak, a loud burst of laughter from the camp drowned his words. The men had begun to sing, voices strong but careless, filling the night with noise. "You must make them take guard," Claire said. Her voice was quiet yet firm. "Tell them to keep watch." Ethan nodded and moved to speak with Captain Luke. But the captain only laughed when Ethan told him. "The queen fears ghosts," Luke said loudly, his voice carrying through the camp. "Ooze. Shall we hide from shadows now?" The soldiers roared with laughter again. Claire closed her eyes for a moment. She wished her men would understand before it was too late. She had felt this presence before, long ago on a forgotten road, when something unseen had spared her life. It had promised return, and she had prayed that promise would never be kept. Now, standing in the still forest, she feared that promise had come. Night deepened. The stars lit the sky, cold and distant. The fires burned lower, and the men's songs faded into drunken silence. Some fell asleep by the flames, while others stumbled back to their tents. Only a few guards stood at the edges of the camp, half awake, their rifles leaning against their shoulders. Ethan sat near Claire, sharpening his blade again. He did not laugh, nor did he drink. He watched the dark line of trees where no bird called, no wind stirred. The queen's eyes stayed fixed there as well. They both felt it. Something was waiting. Something was watching. The silence had a weight that no man's laughter could break. Claire spoke at last, her voice steady. "They will not believe until they see. But by then it may be too late." Ethan looked at her, his face pale in the firelight. "Then we must be ready," he said. In the darkness beyond the trees, two pale lights blinked and vanished. Ethan saw them for only a moment and felt his chest grow cold. Claire did not turn her head. She already knew. The camp grew quiet as the night pushed deeper. The fires burned low, sending up thin trails of smoke into the star-filled sky. Most of the soldiers lay asleep, some still clutching half-empty cups, others snoring loudly with boots still on. The air was heavy and cold, pressing down on everything. Only a few guards stood watch, their heads nodding with sleep, rifles hanging loose in their hands. Queen Claire walked slowly along the edge of the camp. Her eyes searched the trees, but she saw only shadows stacked upon shadows. The forest seemed to lean in closer, as if the trees themselves were listening. Every step she took, she felt the stillness pressing harder. She wanted to shake her men awake, to tell them to ready themselves, yet she knew they would only laugh again. Ethan moved beside her, keeping his voice low.
"Ow."
"The men will not listen, my queen. They think the danger is only in stories." "Then they are blind," Claire answered, her eyes never leaving the dark woods. "Blind men walk into their own graves." Ethan glanced back toward the camp. Two guards leaned against a wagon, speaking to each other in low voices. They laughed at something and paid no mind to the black forest that stretched before them. Ethan's grip tightened on his blade. He had seen the pale lights earlier and knew they were not tricks of the mind. Far in the forest, a low sound rumbled through the earth. It was not loud, but it carried weight, like a growl buried deep in stone. Claire felt it beneath her boots. She stopped, listening hard, but the sound faded into silence once more. She looked to Ethan, and he nodded. He had heard it too. Back in the camp, a soldier began to sing again, his drunken voice rising and breaking. Others shouted for him to be quiet, but laughter soon followed. The careless joy of men who did not believe in fear filled the night once more. Claire's jaw tightened. She wished they could hear the silence she heard, the kind of silence that meant death was near. Ethan stepped closer to her and spoke in a whisper. "I found marks earlier today, on the stones by the ridge. They were deep, like claws dragging across rock. It's too large for any beast we know." Claire turned her gaze on him, and her eyes told him she already knew. "This land carries scars," she said softly. "It remembers what hunts it." Suddenly, one of the guards shouted. The camp stirred as a few men sat up, rubbing their eyes. The guard pointed toward the tree line, his voice loud and nervous. "I saw movement. Something out there." His partner laughed and shook his head. "You see shadows, nothing more?" He returned to leaning against the wagon. But Claire had already moved forward, her hand resting on the hilt of her sword. Ethan followed at her side. The men who had been laughing earlier now gathered, curious but not yet afraid. Some picked up their rifles, though their faces still held mocking smiles. Captain Luke strode up with his usual grin. "Your Majesty, shall I shoot the shadows for you?" His words earned another round of laughter. But the forest gave no laugh in return. Instead, the wind shifted, carrying a smell of iron and rot. The laughter faltered as the men wrinkled their noses. The guard who had first shouted now stood pale, his eyes wide, pointed again, his hand shaking. "There, I swear by my life, something moved." Ethan strained his eyes. For a heartbeat, he saw a shapeshift between the trees, tall and massive, moving without sound. He opened his mouth to warn the others, but before he could speak, the figure was gone, swallowed by the dark. Claire raised her hand, and her voice cut through the camp. "Enough. No more laughter. We are not alone." Her tone carried such force that even Captain Luke fell silent. The men looked at each other uneasily. The drunken smiles faded as the silence pressed on them again. A single cry echoed from deeper in the forest. It was sharp, high, and terrible, unlike any sound the soldiers had ever heard. It carried pain and hunger all at once. The men froze, every face turning toward the trees. No one laughed now. Claire's heart pounded, but her face showed no fear. She had known this sound before, years ago. It was the sound of something that did not kill for food alone, but for promise. She turned to Ethan. "It has begun." The cry from the forest still rang in the ears of the soldiers when the silence returned. Every man held his breath, rifles gripped tight. The firelight shook across their faces as the flames snapped in the cold night air. Queen Claire stood tall at the edge of the camp, her eyes fixed on the trees. Ethan moved beside her, his blade already drawn. No one laughed now. The men waited, but they did not wait long. From the shadows came a sudden rush of sound, like thunder breaking the stillness. A massive shape burst from the trees, landing in the center of the camp with a roar that shook the ground. Soldiers stumbled back in terror, some falling to the dirt. The creature moved faster than any eyes could follow. A rifle fired once, then another, but the bullets did nothing. The beast was already upon them. One man screamed as claws tore through steel armor as if it were cloth. Another tried to run but was lifted into the air and thrown against a wagon, his body broken before he hit the ground. Panic spread through the camp. The laughter of an hour ago was gone, replaced by shouts and cries of fear. Claire shouted, her voice strong above the chaos. "Form lines, stand and fight." Her command cut through the noise, and some men obeyed, raising rifles and aiming at the dark shape. Shots rang out, sparks flying as bullets struck, but the beast moved again. It was too fast, darting between the men like a shadow made of muscle and claw. Ethan rushed to Claire's side as the beast turned toward her. Its eyes glowed pale in the firelight, and in that moment Ethan knew it was hunting her above all others. With a burst of speed, the predator lunged, claws reaching for her. Ethan shoved her aside and raised his blade, the steel catching the strike just in time. The force of the blow knocked him to the ground, but Claire was spared. She rose quickly, sword in hand. The beast turned its gaze on her, tilting its head as if studying her. The soldiers fired again, but the shots only made it snarl. Claire's voice rang out once more. "Do not break. Hold your ground." Her words steadied some of the men, though their hands shook as they reloaded. With another roar, the beast struck again. This time, it crashed through a wagon, splintering wood and scattering supplies. Men scrambled, some trying to flee, others firing blindly into the dark. Captain Luke shouted for order, but his voice broke with fear. He had laughed at her before, but now his face was pale, his eyes wide with dread. The camp burned with panic as fire spread from the broken wagons. Smoke filled the air, mixing with the stench of blood. Claire fought through it, swinging her sword at every shadow that moved. Ethan rose to his feet, clutching his blade, and stood beside her once more. Together they faced the dark shape that circled them, moving faster than wind. Suddenly the beast stopped. Silence fell again, broken only by the crackle of flames. The soldiers stood frozen, their weapons raised. The creature's eyes locked on Claire. Then, to the horror of every man present, a sound came from its mouth. Not a roar, not a growl, but words, deep human words. "Claire," it spoke, her name rolling from its throat with a terrible weight. The sound froze the men where they stood. Rifles lowered slowly, fear gripping their hearts. No bee should speak, yet this one had spoken the Queen's name. The silence after that single word was heavy as stone. Claire felt her chest tighten. She had feared this moment, but now it was here. She stepped forward, her voice steady, though her heart pounded. "I know you," she said. The beast tilted its head again, as if in answer. Around her, the soldiers whispered in terror. Some backed away, unable to face what they had seen. The predator stood still, watching her. Its body glistened with the blood of men, its claws still wet, yet it made no move to strike. It had spoken her name, and in that moment the soldiers understood the truth. The Queen had not feared shadows. She had feared something real, something that had come for her. And now it stood before them, waiting, while the fires burned and the men trembled in silence. The camp stood frozen in fear. Fire burned low, sending shadows racing across torn tents and broken wagons. The soldiers clutched their rifles, but none dared to move. Their eyes were fixed on the predator that stood tall and silent, its glowing gaze locked on Queen Claire. The name it had spoken still hung in the air, heavy and sharp like a blade. Claire kept her sword raised, though her hands shook. Ethan stood beside her, his blade gripped tight, ready to defend her, even as fear clawed at his chest. Captain Luke's voice cracked as he whispered. It spoke her name. His face was pale, his confidence broken. The men who had mocked her earlier now stared at her in terror, waiting for her to give them answers. Claire did not step back. She faced the creature head on. "Why do you call me?" Claire said, her voice steady though her breath ran quick. "What do you want here?" The beast tilted its head, its chest rising and falling with a slow rhythm. Then its voice came again, low and deep, each word clear. "You were promised, you were spared. The time is now." The words chilled the men. They shifted uneasily, their fear growing as the meaning sank in. Ethan's eyes widened. He turned to her quickly. "My queen, what does it mean? You know this thing?" Claire did not answer him at once. Her mind pulled her back to a memory she had buried for years. Long ago, before she was queen, she had led a small band through a ruined valley. There, in the ashes of that place, she had met the same predator. It had stood over her, claws ready, but it had not struck. Instead, it had leaned close and whispered that it would come for her when the time was right. She had lived with that shadow ever since, and now it had returned. She looked to Ethan, her voice low but firm. "It knows me. It spared me once. It has come to claim what it believes is owed." Ethan stared at her, but he saw no fear in her eyes, only resolve. Suddenly the predator moved again. The soldiers raised their rifles, but Claire lifted her hand and shouted, "Hold your fire." The beast had not attacked. It stepped closer instead, its eyes never leaving hers. The men trembled as its massive frame came into the firelight, scars and blood covering its body, yet its steps were calm, almost measured. "Claire," it said again, slower this time. "You cannot hide." Ethan stepped between them, his blade raised. "You will not take her," he shouted. The predator stopped, looking down at him, silence stretched, thick and cold. Then it gave a sound that was almost a laugh, but it was low and cruel. "You are nothing," it told Ethan. "She is mine." With a sudden burst of motion, it struck. Ethan blocked with his blade, sparks flying as steel clashed against claw. The force sent him staggering back, but he did not fall. Claire rushed forward, swinging her sword at the beast. Her strike cut across its arm, leaving a line of blood, but the predator only roared and struck back. The ground shook as its claws smashed into the dirt where she had stood moments before. The camp erupted again. Soldiers fired, bullets flashing through the night. Some hit, tearing into the predator's hide, but it moved too quickly, weaving between their shots. It struck men down with sweeps of its claws, sending bodies flying. Still, Claire and Ethan stood their ground. Side by side they fought, their blades flashing in the firelight. The soldiers, seeing their queen fight without fear, found strength. They shouted and fired with new resolve, trying to hold the monster back. The air filled with gunfire, smoke, and the cries of men. The predator fought through it all, its eyes fixed on Claire, as if the others did not matter. At last the beast leaped back, standing at the edge of the camp once more. Its chest heaved, blood dripping from its wounds, yet it still stood strong. Its voice came again, louder, carrying across the battlefield. "This is only the beginning. Claire, your name will be called again. Your soldiers will learn fear." With that, it turned and vanished into the dark forest. Silence followed, broken only by the crackle of burning wood and the groans of the wounded. The soldiers looked to their queen, their fear mixed with awe. They had seen the truth, her warnings had been real. And now they knew that the battle was far from over. The night after the attack felt long and heavy. The camp lay in ruins, wagons burned to ashes and blood staining the ground. The wounded cried out for help while the dead were lined in silence. Soldiers worked with shaking hands, dragging bodies, patching wounds, and building new fires. No man laughed now. Every eye turned to the dark forest, fearing another strike. Queen Claire walked among them, her sword still at her side, her face hard with resolve. She had warned them, and now they knew. Ethan stayed close to her, helping where he could, though his body ached from the fight. His blade still carried the mark of the clash with the predator. He looked at Claire as she moved through the wounded, speaking calm words and giving orders. The men followed her command without question. The queen, who had been mocked for fear, now held their full trust. Captain Luke approached her, his head bowed. His voice was low and ashamed. "Forgive me, my queen. I should have listened. My laughter has cost us many lives." Claire looked at him, her eyes sharp. "Do not waste time with regret. Honor the dead by standing ready for the next strike." Luke bowed his head deeper, knowing her words were truth. When the fires were built and the wounded treated, the men gathered before Claire. Their faces were pale, their hands trembling, but their eyes waited on her. She stood tall on the broken steps of a wagon, the firelight casting shadows across her armor. "You have seen the truth," she told them. "The predator that hunts us is not beast alone. It speaks, it remembers. It chose this moment to strike because it knew fear ruled your hearts. But we will not let fear rule again." The men listened in silence, their fear slowly turning into something harder. Ethan felt it too. The queen's voice carried strength, and it gave him courage. When she finished, the soldiers struck their rifles against the ground, a sign that they stood with her. Later that night, Ethan sat with Claire by the edge of the camp. The fire between them burned low. He turned to her and spoke quietly. "You said it spared you once. Tell me what happened." She did not answer at first, her gaze fixed on the forest. Then she spoke, her words heavy. "Years ago, before I wore a crown, I led a small band through the valley of Blackstone. There we found ruins, and in those ruins it found us. My men died one by one, torn apart, and I fought it until my strength was gone. It stood over me, claws ready, yet it did not strike. Instead, it leaned close and spoke my name, though I had never spoken it to any. It said I would live, but that I belonged to it. Since then, I have waited, knowing the day would come." Ethan listened, his chest tight. "And now the day has come," he said. Claire nodded. Yes, their words were cut off by a sudden sound in the forest. A deep cry, not one but many, rose together. The men leaped to their feet, rifles ready. Shadows moved in the trees, dozens of shapes shifting in the darkness. Ethan drew his blade at once. "They are not finished," he said. Claire stood, her sword in her hand. "They will test us again." The soldiers formed lines quickly under her command. Traps were set, fires lit high, to push back the dark. The air filled with the smell of smoke and iron. The ground trembled as more predators moved at the edge of the forest. Their glowing eyes shone like a line of stars waiting to fall. Fear rippled through the soldiers, but none laughed now. They looked to their queen, and they stood ready. Claire raised her sword high. "Hold the line," she shouted. "No one runs. No one breaks." The men roared in answer, their voices shaking the night. Ethan took his place at her side, his blade ready for the storm that was about to fall. From the forest came the rush of claws and feet. The predators charged, their cries filling the night sky. The ground shook as the battle began again. Claire stood in front, her sword flashing as the first one leapt toward her. Ethan struck down another, his blade cutting through dark flesh. The soldiers fired in unison, the sound of gunfire rolling like thunder. The camp turned into a storm of fire, steel, and blood. Through the chaos, one voice rose above the rest. The speaking predator, larger than the others, stood at the edge once more. Its voice carried across the battle, calling Claire's name again, reminding her that this was not only a fight for survival, but a fight for her very soul. The battlefield was chaos. Fire burned wagons and tents, smoke filling the night air. Soldiers shouted and fired, their voices mixed with the roars and cries of the predators. The ground shook with every step, and blood soaked the earth where men had fallen. Queen Claire moved through the storm of battle, her sword flashing in the firelight, striking at any predator that came too close. Ethan stayed at her side, his blade meeting claws that sought to tear them apart. Captain Luke tried to rally the men, shouting orders, but the predators were fast and deadly. The soldiers who had laughed at their queen's fear now fought for their lives, each strike guided by her presence. Claire's voice cut through the chaos. "Hold your ground. Do not falter. Stand with me." Her command gave courage to the soldiers, and they held the line against the relentless charge. Ethan swung his blade, parrying a strike that could have ended his life. The predator was strong, faster than any man, but he fought with every ounce of strength. He saw Claire in the midst of the fray, striking with precision, moving like a shadow yet solid and unyielding. Each predator that lunged at her fell beneath her blade, but more came, filling the darkness with hunger and rage. A massive predator broke through the line, its eyes glowing pale and cruel. It moved toward Claire with deliberate speed. She met it head-on, her sword clashing against its claws, sparks flying from the impact. Ethan rushed to aid her, swinging his blade at the beast's side. It snarled, twisting to strike him instead. He blocked and countered, forcing it back. Around them, the soldiers fought desperately. Some fell to claws and teeth, others were thrown to the ground by powerful strikes. The air was thick with smoke, dust, and the stench of blood, yet Claire and Ethan moved as one, their strength inspiring those around them. The men's fear turned into resolve as they saw their queen fight without hesitation, without doubt. Claire's eyes caught movement at the edge of the camp. More predators waited in the dark, circling, planning their attack. She raised her sword high, signaling the soldiers to form a tighter line. "We will not let them take our ground," she shouted. The men roared in answer, their fear turning into fury. Rifles fired in unison, and some predators fell, but the larger one, the one that had spoken, waited, watching. Suddenly it spoke again, its voice cutting through the battle. "Claire, you cannot escape. All who follow you will fall." The words made the soldiers pause, fear creeping back into their hearts. Ethan stepped forward, shouting back, "We follow her because we choose to, not because we fear." His voice carried through the chaos, and the men responded with renewed energy. "Da!" The predator roared, leaping into the center of the camp. Claire met it head-on, their swords clashing with a force that shook the ground beneath them. Ethan intercepted another predator that tried to flank her, striking with precision, his muscles burning with effort. The soldiers formed a wall behind them, firing and stabbing, holding the beasts back from breaking through completely. Time seemed endless. Fire and smoke clouded the night, but Claire and Ethan fought without rest. Each predator that fell was replaced by another, relentless and cunning. The speaking predator circled, testing them, its eyes never leaving Claire. The men fought desperately, inspired by her courage, determined to survive. Finally, after what seemed like hours, the predators faltered. The speaking one paused at the edge of the firelight, breathing heavily, covered in wounds, yet still standing tall. Its eyes locked on Claire, and for a moment silence fell. It knew the battle was not yet over, but the humans had proven themselves strong. It growled low and slowly backed into the shadows, disappearing from sight. The soldiers stood panting, weapons raised, sweat and blood covering their faces. The fires burned low, the smoke curling into the night. Ethan lowered his blade, breathing heavily, and looked to Claire. She stood at the center, her sword still raised, blood on her hands and face, yet her eyes shone with resolve. The men gathered around, exhausted but alive. They had faced the predator and survived, but they knew the war was far from over. The battlefield lay in ruins. Smoke curled into the night sky, fire burned in broken wagons, and the cries of the wounded echoed through the camp. Soldiers moved carefully, checking their comrades, tending to the injured, and keeping watch for any return of the predators. Queen Claire walked among them, her sword still at her side, her eyes sharp and alert. Ethan stayed close, his muscles tense, ready for another strike at any moment. The men had learned fear. Those who had mocked their queen's warnings now understood the power she carried. Their eyes followed her every movement, knowing that she had seen what they could not. The battle had tested them all, and many had fallen, but they stood stronger, bound together by survival and courage. Claire turned to Ethan, her face streaked with blood and sweat. "They are not gone forever," she said. "The predator and its kind will return. This is only the first test. We must be ready." Ethan nodded, his jaw tight. "We will be ready. Together we can hold them back." The soldiers gathered around them, forming a loose circle. Captain Luke stepped forward, his face pale, but determined. "My queen, we will follow you wherever you lead. Your fear was ours, and your courage is ours now." Claire looked at him, and then at the others. "Stand tall. Train. Watch the forests. Every man here must be ready. We fight not just for ourselves, but for every life that depends on us." A sudden noise came from the edge of the camp. Everyone froze, rifles raised. From the dark forest came a low rumble, a warning more than a threat. The predators had not forgotten. Their eyes glimmered in the shadows, watching, waiting. Claire lifted her sword and stepped forward. "We will face them. We will survive. We will not run." The men tightened their ranks. Ethan stood beside Claire, breathing steady but tense. They had fought the impossible and lived. The predators had tested them, and they had proven they were not easy prey. Every man and woman in the camp felt a new strength, born of fear and battle. Claire remembered the first time she had met the speaking predator, the promise it had made years ago. It had come now, fulfilling that promise. Yet she had faced it and survived. Her heart was steady, her mind clear. She would not let it claim her or her soldiers without a fight. "We train, we prepare, and when they return, we will be ready. We fight together. No one stands alone." Ethan watched the soldiers, their faces pale but strong. They had been afraid, yet they had stood. He knew that their unity, guided by Claire, would be the key to surviving what was to come. He glanced at her, respect and loyalty shining in his eyes. She had led them through death and chaos, and they had followed without hesitation. The night grew quiet again. The predators had disappeared into the dark forest, leaving the humans to their camp and their wounds. The fires burned low, casting long shadows over the broken ground. Claire and Ethan walked the perimeter, their senses alert, knowing that this night was only the beginning. The predators would return, and they would return stronger. But the soldiers had changed. They had seen their queen's courage, they had faced the impossible, and they had survived. Fear was no longer their master. They had learned to stand, to fight, to protect. The bond between them and their queen had grown unbreakable. Claire raised her sword to the sky, the flames reflecting off its steel. We live, we fight, we endure. And when they return, they will find us ready. The soldiers echoed her words, their voices strong and steady. Ethan joined in, his blade raised. The night air carried their voices into the forest, a warning and a promise. The predator had called her name, but Claire was no longer afraid. She had faced death and survived. The war was not over, but she and her soldiers had proven that humans could endure what no one else could. The night fell around them, silent and tense, yet within the camp, the spark of courage burned brighter than any fire. They would survive, they would fight, and they would not yield. The predator would remember their names, and it would know that humans were not easy prey.